The first scene of the film is Bert and Mitzi Fabelman taking their kid Sammy to the movies, his first movie, and he's scared. And his father's way of dealing with that is to explain to him how a film camera works, explain to him how a projector works, and as if a child would then be able to sort of rationalize that and go, I see, it's only images flickering, they're still images, it's not real, they're actually not even moving themselves. And finally Mitzi sort of cuts him off and says, they're wonderful dreams and you'll never forget them. And she gives it this sort of big positive, dreamy, artful, and yes, you absolutely see, I think, Stephen. I think you see both parts of Stephen and his parents, because he's obviously such, he's an incredible technician, but such an intuitive, emotional, dreamy artist himself. It was pretty incredible to see Stephen looking back at his life and yeah, tears streaming down his face, right? Which that sort of openness and vulnerability, you know, it goes to everybody on the soundstage. So it certainly actually helped me, you know, to see him, to look at his face and his eyes and see his story in him, and then try to, you know, take that. It just sort of raises the stakes almost, or something, in a wonderful way. What surprised me about watching the film was how inspiring it was. To see the amount of joy, the sense of humor in it, and how inspired it left me, you know, later that day and that night, the way the film ends, that surprised me, and that made me feel really good, because I think, you know, that's a wonderful thing to give to an audience. We're talking a lot about how personal this is for Stephen and his life, but I think ultimately the reason that it's the Fabelmans is because it could be anybody's family, right? And we've all had a relationship with one of our parents, or our parents did, or our sister. The film goes beyond Stephen. There's something in it for anyone who's had a family, for anyone who's loved the movies, for anybody who's like dared to dream, you know, and dream big and had a passion. Having the access to Stephen's personal stuff, family photographs, home movies, voice recordings. Yeah, that was a treasure trove for me as an actor, and sort of remarkable to have that sort of intimate relationship with somebody like Stephen.
She always described herself as somebody who loved the desert. Like, that's where she felt at home, and that's where she wanted to be. And there's such beautiful footage of their family camping trips in the desert, and then as they go to a sort of colder, wetter climate, the internal and the external temperatures start to shift. Yeah, they're really like the two halves of Stephen, you know, the way that this married couple sort of balanced each other out and gave room for the other to fully express themselves. And you see that, you know, in their son, the way that they sort of commingled, like that is Stephen. One of my favorite things to do was to listen to her laugh. It was one of my kind of touchstones that I would use to sort of like right before we would shoot. I mean, I had so many beautiful home movies of her, and like just so much footage that was so dear to me that I just watched over and over and over again. But kind of like a shortcut for me was her laughter. And it was this like looped tape of her laughing at different ages in her life, different moments in her life. And I would go to it even before scenes that didn't encapsulate, didn't where she wasn't laughing or where that wasn't a part of it. It still was so much her essence, like the desire to laugh. Like she just felt like somebody who was about to break out into, who wanted to break out into a smile at any moment. And there was just so much, like she was just so full of life. And the way that she laughed, the way that she gave herself over to her laugh, that really kind of summed her up for me. Right. She has a passion that she really, that she didn't live to the fullest expression. She didn't become a concert pianist, even though she could have become a concert pianist. I think in her son, she sees his ability to live his life completely as an artist. You know, I didn't have like a preconception of him. I didn't expect him to be one way, and then he surprised me by being another way. I was meeting him for the first time. I was completely open to who this person was without an idea of who they should be or who they were going to be. And who I met there was a person who's still deeply attached to their childhood and deeply attached to a sense of play and discovery and like moment to moment joy. And what I found was somebody who I had the most fun of my life with, and I couldn't wait to see what he was going to tell me and to see where that would take me and then to see where we would go from there. So it just felt like every day we built in this sort of, you know, imaginary world together. But he was so much my partner in that, and the most incredible actor's director. You know, you think of him, you think of his shots, and you think of his, you know, technical genius and these, you know, the shots that he devises. But, you know, I'm here to tell you as an actor, it's just he's devising that with you about an emotional life and a journey that you can go on through a scene as much as he's devising it with how the cameras are moving. So, you know, I'm still like reeling from it. I haven't worked since, and I don't know.
We did Ditch Day on the beach, and there are like 180 extras. And I just remember on that day being very impressed that he thought he was going to have 2 days to do it, but he only had 1 day, and he got twice as much done in that day with 180 extras and these crane shots and doing all that. It was Ditch Day that I realized he's truly, you know, Steven Spielberg. There's myself, Sammy, and I have 3 younger sisters. And then you have Michelle, my mom, Paul, my dad, and Seth is Paul's best friend, but we call him an uncle because he's around all the time. He goes on camping trips with us. Seth's character, Benny, and Michelle's character, Mitzi, they're in love with each other. And I, Sammy, discover that, and there's a burden of holding that secret to me because I can't tell my sisters and I have to protect them, and I can't tell my mom because it would destroy her. I can't tell my dad because it would break us up. And so there's a lot of pent-up emotions about that. He was pretty clear that he didn't want it to be like mimicking him, you know, almost the story speaks for itself. So he let me do a lot of it on my own. And though I didn't, you know, act as if I was him, I mean, there are a few things that I wanted to grab, just of like his posture and his smile. And they sent me some videos of him and his parents' home movies, the old Escape to Nowhere film. I knew that I wouldn't try to like recreate that 100%, but I wanted to get an energy.
I asked him a lot of questions about the real Bernie, about the dynamics. I tried to get as much information as I could. They were sensitive conversations because I was essentially asking him about how specifically far he thought, you know, these kind of indiscretions were going in an emotional way, in a physical way. And they were uncomfortable conversations at times, honestly, and things that he didn't seem to particularly want to talk about. But then often he would kind of break through, and then a whole new kind of page would be revealed. And often as we were filming things, he would run over and be like, oh, Bernie would do this all the time. Like, let's get another take where you're doing this. And it was almost like in real time he was remembering things and putting them in the movie. And I almost think when he started, maybe he thought it wasn't going to be quite as representative of his life as he found himself being willing to make it as we were doing. I play in the film Uncle Benny is what he's called. He's introduced as Paul Dano's character, Bert's best friend and co-worker. I'm on his team of computer builders, essentially. And I've kind of entrenched myself in their family. I seem very comfortable there. I seem like I've made myself at home. And I have a very deep, meaningful connection with the entire family, with the kids, with the siblings, the brothers and the sisters. And slowly it is revealed that me, that my character and, Mitzi, Sammy's mother, are in love with each other. And all the complications that go along with that. It is called The Fabelmans, but at no moment while we were making the movie did it seem as though he was trying to differentiate between this family and his own. Like, I think if the movie was called The Spielbergs, it would just be a lot less accessible. And I think that's kind of what's brilliant about calling it The Fabelmans, is it allows you to project yourself and your family in the place of this family in a way that I think if it was called The Spielbergs, you wouldn't be able to. It would keep you slightly more at arm's length. It's about family. I think if you have a family, it's an interesting story. And if your family is complicated, as most are, then it's an interesting story. And it's about, to me, that's what's interesting about it. It's about navigating your family, getting to know your own family, and how the humanization of your parents especially is kind of a tragic yet beautiful thing that happens to a lot of us. And I think that's something that almost everyone experiences in some way. This camping trip we shot over the course of a few days, and in it is when the footage is captured that ultimately kind of reveals the relationship between Benny and Mitzi, and Steven filmed a lot of that stuff himself. A lot of the 8mm footage and 16mm footage, he was operating the little camera, and yeah, there were times where it seemed as though it was like a little time machine he was holding, and what he was seeing through the lens was literally bringing him back to these experiences. And it must have been very surreal because he first filmed them 60 years ago, and now he's filming recreations of them with actors he's cast, but he is literally recreating these things that he filmed, and it felt very special and strange to, to just see this filmmaker really trying to capture the beauty and sadness of these moments of his actual life.
Well, after having seen the movie and truly not knowing, because it's been so long, it's almost a year that we did it, it was a total experience for me that I realized I was in something much more important than I could possibly imagine. And it's sort of grateful to know that Spielberg was a brave man to do a movie so special and so well done that I guess you could feel like, wow, this was an honor to be in a movie like this. This is not one of those that you just simply know is going to be one of a number of movies that anybody's done. This is one of the only movies that I could say I was in it. As I said to Steven just recently, thank you for parachuting me into this movie, because that's what it feels like. He's a guy who comes from nowhere. He's an ancient family member who I believe represents something frightening, or so they thought. It ends up telling the character who plays Steven that he must be a director. That was the purpose of the part. And I said, what's he like? And he said, make him up. So I thought, okay, I'll represent the guy, I won't know the real one, and it won't matter. And I guess he thought that I was enough like him. All I know is I was sort of like invited, guessed my way through, played somebody I never was or ever will be. Well, maybe because I'm older, but a foreigner, total foreigner. Guy comes from Ukraine. That's all he gave me, nothing more. He said, you could have an accent, you could not have an. I even asked him at one time, I said, the real guy, your real great uncle, what was he like? He said, sometimes we couldn't understand a word he said. Boom. Okay.
Imagine having, a relative who used to be a lion tamer at the circus and did other, dirty deeds also in the circus. He swept out the pachyderms, stalls, things like that when he was working his way up, trying to get into the big top at the time. He did a lot of different things, but they were always eccentric and they were always bigger than life. And I think he had the biggest personality of anybody my mother knew of all of her relatives. He had the biggest personality. And I know that he scared my grandmother and he scared my mom a lot because he was just always sucked all the air out of the room. I only met him a couple of times. I remember meeting him when I was like 5 or 6 or 7 years old, and he was always somebody I wanted to go into the other room when he started talking in that overly loud voice with that thick Ukrainian accent. He scared me. And then when he came to Phoenix, Arizona to pay his respects after my grandmother died, which is shown in the movie, that was, as a kid, maybe 16 years old, that's when I really understood that this is probably where show business came from. I think my show business gene probably came from both my mother, who was a performer in her own restaurant, and probably a little bit genetically from Uncle Boris. I think everything that a filmmaker puts him or herself into, even if it's somebody else's script and you're just picking the shots and directing the actors, your life is going to come spilling out onto celluloid, whether you like it or not. It just happens to all of us. But in the sense of the Fabelmans, it wasn't about metaphor, it was about memory. And one of the reasons I wrote this story is because at a very young age, something had happened in my life, which is reflected in our film, but something happened in my life between myself and my mother, where I stopped perceiving my mother as a parent and began looking upon her as a person. And I think all kids at a certain point in their lives, if they grow up in a communicative relationship with their parents, and they themselves have kids, there are moments where they realize, hey, my parents have been people all this time, and I never knew it until now. And maybe the kid is 40, and the parents are 65, when that epiphany occurs. I had that epiphany when I was 16 years old, and so I've never looked at any of the people in my story as enemies. The aspects of my Jewish existence is just, it's part of the DNA. It just goes without much comment. That's how we grew up. The bullying is just it doesn't define me and it doesn't define my life, but it certainly is something that happened to me. Very little in Arizona, but more so in California, in Northern California. The school bears no weight of culpability or responsibility at all, but I wanted to tell that story because it did result in a lot of my own awareness of anti-Semitism, which led to other films about anti-Semitism that I've made in my life. I looked for several things. I looked for somebody who was really much more handsome than me, and somebody that the girls would probably fall for more than they fell for me. And I cast somebody who had insatiable curiosity, which I know I've always possessed. And as a person, Gabe has insatiable curiosity. And that was, when I started meeting him on Zoom calls, that was the thing that I really connected with him about, was how many questions he asks and how he questions everything and how he's open to basically receive and accept any answer because he's curious. And that was the one thing I knew about myself consistently in my entire life. I'm curious about so many things, which is why I make so many different kinds of movies and not just the same kind of movie over and over again, because my curiosity throws me into genres that I never imagined I would ever do. And now I'm suddenly doing a genre I've never done before. And he's that way. I wanted to have that kind of doctor-patient relationship with my cast, but it was hard to do it because the story kept tugging me back to actual memories and recreating things that had actually happened to me and seeing them unspool in front of me. It was a wicked, weird experience, I have to tell you. It was just like nothing I have ever gone through before. And ultimately, it was a very good experience. It was really a great thing to have gone through. And I'm happy I did. There are no villains in The Fabelmans. You know, in a way, The Fabelmans is a story about the act, you know, the act of forgiveness and how important that act of forgiveness is. I would not have been able to co-author this film without somebody I truly, dearly admired and adored and knew me so well, and who I so loved and respected. And that happened to be Tony Kushner. And just because he won a Pulitzer Prize and the Tony Award and been nominated several times for Academy Awards, for me, you know, that wasn't a criteria. The only thing that mattered to me was I could open it up to somebody, and I could basically unpack all of my suitcases in front of somebody, and I would never feel embarrassed or ashamed, and could actually go down a very personal road. And that's why I asked if Tony would co-author this with me. Tony and I didn't set about to make a comedy, but you know, life is full of things that are ridiculous and silly and hysterically funny and abstract and existential and also very sad and traumatizing. And it's just what all of us go through as we go through our formative years. And I simply wanted this to be a coming-of-age story that basically takes stock in the stuff that happens to us that we wish never happened, and the stuff that happens to us which we look back on and laugh hysterically because it wasn't funny at the time. But in looking back, it was pretty funny. Michelle Williams walked in clothes that my mom, exact replicas of clothes my mom had worn, her favorite clothes. And Paul walked in looking just like my dad. And I turned around and I looked at Paul and Michelle together. And it was kind of an out-of-body moment. There was a little moment where everything sort of went into slow motion like a car accident. And I just looked at them together. And I didn't see Michelle and I didn't see Paul. I saw Lee and Arnold. I saw my mom and my dad. And I kind of lost it. So everything that I said I was not going to do on the first day of shooting happened to me. And bless their hearts, they both walked up to me and they both embraced me. So we were in a three-way hug. And that was the beginning of a beautiful friendship. It was fun to recreate my 8mm films. I wish I could have recreated my 8mm films to the amateurish degree I shot them at when I was 11, 12, 14, 16, 17 years old. I wasn't able to resist finding a better place to put the camera in 2021 when I made the movie than where I put the camera in 1961. I just couldn't resist it. I didn't want this story to be told in a vanity mirror. You know, I wanted the story to be told in more of a communal mirror so people could see their own families inside the story. Because this story is about family, and it's about parents, it's about siblings, it's about bullying, it's about the good and bad things that happen when you're growing up in a family that pretty much stays together until they're no longer together.
The camera's the way in, and it is for a long time. It gives him a sense of identity. It gives him a sense of being. And then it betrays him by showing him more than he wanted to see. I came up with the name Fabelmans because I said we can't call it, it's not going to be little Steven Spielberg and Arnold and Lee. It has to be to give them other names. And, Spielberg in German means play mountain. And in German, der Fabel is the outline that you make of a play, and it's a fiction for the form of entertainment. And then I said, okay, what are we going to call these people? And he said Sammy, and most of the first names were Stevens. Stevens was more worried about how Bernie, the man that Leah Spielberg married, would come off, because Steven loved him and grew up with him. and knew him all his life. And especially he was concerned about how his mother was going to come off, that she not be seen as villainous. And I didn't worry about it, but everything Stephen told me about her, I mean, these nutty things that she did, just seemed like one of the most amazing characters I'd ever come across. I said to Stephen at one point, what was the first movie you remember? He said, that's easy, Greatest Show on Earth. And I said, what did you remember most about it? He said, oh, no question, The Trainwreck. And then at one point I said, when did you first get a camera in your hands? And he told me the story that you see at the beginning of the movie. And I thought, well, this is, again, unbelievable. I read 3 books on what Arnold Spielberg contributed to science. Stephen has often told the story that when he met Bill Gates, I think Bill Gates said something like, I'm happy to meet you, but what I'd really like to do is meet your dad. Because as an engineer, Arnold Spielberg made a contribution to the idea of computers as a multi-user platform system way early on. He started with cash registers that he developed the idea through to IBM, and it really became one of the, there are all sorts of things connected to it, memory storage and so on. It became a part of what made Microsoft and the real sort of personal computer revolution possible.
She does a lot of research. She asked very early on, she said to Stephen, I need everything I can get my hands on that reminds me of your mother. I would like to have videos, I'd love to have photographs, I'd love to have voice recordings, movies that she loved, songs that she loved, music that she loved to play, anything that can make me feel more and more like your mother. And so we had dedicated iPads that we gave to her and Paul so that they could reference and research and, immerse themselves into playing these characters. When I read it the first time, I was like, this is going to be the most personal story Stephen's ever done. This is all about Stephen. And I closed it and I was like, this is a story that every single person can relate to. And I knew at that moment that we were making the movie. I didn't know exactly when, and we ended up making it like 4 or 5 months after that first script was handed to me. Stephen would forget to yell cut because he got so immersed in the scene that he was shooting and had to take a moment for himself. It was no different than Sammy forgetting to yell cut in the short film he's doing, Escape to Nowhere, where he forgets to yell cut to Angelo as Angelo's walking off into the distance. So all of us on set, we held space for Stephen to have moments. She just sort of morphed into Mitzi, and when she showed up on set for the first day of shooting, which was the scene where they are watching Escape to Nowhere. They were all sitting in the audience, Michelle, Paul, and Seth. You just knew there was nobody else that could have played the role of Mitzi than Michelle Williams. She just embodied everything about her.